Hello friends, as we step into the new year 2022, I welcome you all once again to the wonderful world of stories and why we tell them from Culture Katha. In my last video, we looked at Bhima and how some of his actions set off the initial rivalry between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. It is at this point that the epic introduces us to two important characters, Dronacharya and Kripacharya. Drona and Kripa, as you may know, were the teachers who taught martial skills to both the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Both Drona and Kripa, according to the epic, had supernatural births. Both were Ayonija, or born outside the womb of a woman. They were not just born outside the womb, but were in fact born without the involvement of a female. While Kripa was born from the semen of a Brahmin named Sharadvan, Drona had a similar birth through sage Bharadwaja. In other words, they had a biological father but not a mother. Although Sharadvan and Bharadwaja are shown as being aroused by two beautiful apsaras. The epic also tells us that as soon as Kripa and his twin sister Kripi were born, they were abandoned by their father Sharadvan. The infants were later found by King Shantanu and adopted by him. Meanwhile, Drona was brought up by his own father, Bharadwaja. Apart from their fascinating birth stories, what makes the story of Drona and Kripa interesting is that although born as Brahmins, they show the inclination to learn martial skills, acquire knowledge of celestial weapons, and eventually end up participating in the Kurukshetra war. According to the epic, Kripa's father Sharadvan also showed more interest in Dhanur Vidya or archery than in learning the Vedas. Similarly, we find Drona, a Brahmin, approaching sage Parashurama to acquire knowledge of his celestial weapons. These pursuits were clearly outside the role designated for a Brahmin, who is expected to perform sacrifices, yajnas that is, and or recite and teach the Vedas. But strangely in the epic, neither Drona nor Kripa is seen to be following the typical pursuits of their Brahminical lineage. So what was the epic's stance on social hierarchy? Did the lineage a person was born into decide what he could be in his life, or did individuals have the freedom to choose what they wanted, as clearly Drona and Kripa seem to be doing here? Well, before we seek answers to these questions, it would be a good idea to get a basic idea of the Varna system of social structure and hierarchy. Here it's important to note that the word Varna is often inaccurately translated as caste. Varna was more of a class-based system than a system based on caste or jati. According to the Varna system, the society was divided into four divisions comprising the Brahmanas, who were essentially the spiritual, religious and the thought leaders of the society, the Kshatriyas, who were the warriors in charge of law and order and security, and the Vaishyas, who were the merchants, farmers, artisans, etc. And finally the Shudras, who included the laborers and the domestics who served the above three Varnas. On the other hand, jati or caste refers to a cohesive group of people such as a tribe, a clan, a group or a community bound either by family relationships or beliefs and traditions. These groups typically marry within their own community. A person's jati was thus hereditarily fixed by the jati he was born into. On the other hand, Varna was defined by a person's profession or the role he played in the society. Several scholars agree that in the Varna social order of the early Vedic times, these role definitions were not as rigid as they came to be in the later times. Interestingly, in the early sections of the Mahabharata, particularly in the Adi Parvan, we find several examples for the mixing of the Varnas, both through marital relationships and professional pursuits. So in the stories of Kripa and Drona, we find that although they were born as Brahmins, they did not necessarily perform the designated functions of a Brahmin and instead chose to have other pursuits. Also with respect to marriage, we find several incidents in the Adi Parvan that point to the freedom men and women had to marry outside their own varna. And so we find that King Shantanu marries Satyavati, a fisherwoman. It's interesting how Satyavati's father, a fisherman, lays down a condition for the marriage that the children born in Satyavati's line should have sole claim to the Kuru throne. To which both Shantanu and Devavrata, which was Shantanu's eldest son and heir to the Kuru throne, who later became Bhishma, both of them agree without any objections. We also find Vyasa, born out of wedlock to sage Parashara and fisherwoman Satyavati, being respected and revered by everyone. Similarly, Vidura, who is born from the union of sage Vyasa and a Shudra woman, was the wisest and the most respected person in the Kuru court. Yet another aspect of a Kshatriya father and a Shudra mother was the son born to Dhritarashtra through Gandhari's handmaid. Yuyutsu was his name, and Yuyutsu ended up fighting on the side of the Pandavas in the Kurukshetra battle. While such inter-varna alliances seem to have been quite common and accepted in the times of the epic, we must note that lineage was patriarchal, with the child inheriting his father's varna. So a child born of a Brahmana or a Kshatriya father gained greater social acceptance even when his or her mother was from a lower varna order. Secondly, we must also remember that although Duryodhana was born blind and Pandu born sick, Vidura, the ablest of them all, was not made king, as he was a Dasiputra. Similarly, Yuyutsu, despite being born after Duryodhana, was never given a significant role in state or palace affairs. So even when Vidura and Yuyutsu were accepted in the Kuru clan, they had a limited role to play and certainly could not aspire for the throne. And then of course there is the case of Karna, that is typically held out as a perfect example of discrimination in the epic. Although supposedly a Sutaputra or the son of a charioteer, Karna showed the natural inclination for warfare like a Kshatriya would. But he was never accepted as one by the Pandavas or the Kuru elders. Only Duryodhana was an exception, as he set aside Karna's stated lineage to acknowledge him as a great warrior and friend. And then there is Ekalavya, a tribal whose desire to learn archery is turned down by Drona because Drona wants to keep the knowledge exclusive to his Kshatriya students. Okay, so we have Brahmins taking up arms, a Sutaputra aspiring to be acknowledged as a Kshatriya, and a king marrying a fisherwoman to further his lineage. So what then was the actual stance of the epic on the question of ability versus birth and the purity of descent? As always, the epic does not give us one straight answer, but what it does do is present us with various viewpoints that probably also came from the different time periods in the epic's evolution. So one can hear varied voices in the epic. For every voice that is raised against Karna, one can hear the voice of Duryodhana, who holds Karna in high esteem regardless of his varna. In fact, he asks how anyone can demean Karna when even the Pandavas had a doubtful origin. For every one of the Kaurava siblings who chooses to ignore Yuyutsu, one can hear the voice of Yudhishthira, recognizing and acknowledging the virtues and wisdom of Yuyutsu. At the end of the epic, before setting out to give up his earthly life, Yudhishthira even hands over the responsibility of guiding his successor and great-grandson Parikshit to Yuyutsu. So for every Karna story, the epic also tells us the story of a Vyada or a butcher who teaches the ways of dharma to a Brahmin. And such deep deliberations of the epic are finally put to rest in verse 41 of chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that a person's guna or his natural inclination or tendencies decide his varna and not his birth. Friends, hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please do like and share, and also do subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. And subscriber friends, please remember to press the bell icon to receive notifications on new video uploads. Till I meet you all once again, it's Tata Bye, take care, and my heartfelt wishes for a happy, peaceful and healthy year to you all.